My new $5 million oceanfront property had just become the subject of a claim by my husband's mother. My name is Sarah Patterson. For 15 long years, his relatives had labeled me a calculating gold digger, but against all odds, I had managed to acquire my dream mansion in the Hamptons on my own. I was spending my first evening there when, at exactly 9:00 p.m., the phone rang. The voice of Meryl, my mother-in-law, was dripping with pure arrogance. "We're moving in tomorrow. David has already given his consent. If you're not comfortable with that, you can find yourself new lodging." The phone in my hand trembled, but I forced myself to speak evenly and with restraint. I had achieved so much, building my own career, and for all these years, I had tolerated their treatment, as if I were a servant at every family gathering. This act was the final straw. If you're interested in what happened next, be sure to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what city you're watching from. And now, prepare to hear the story of how her unfathomable audacity turned into the greatest humiliation of her life. September 27th marked the beginning of my new life. After working 13 years, 76 hours a week at Apex Solutions, I finally handed the board of directors my resignation letter. The shock on their faces when they realized the size of the compensation package they would have to pay me, a total sum of $2.9 million, including deferred bonuses and the value of my options, was almost as sweet a reward as the years of being undervalued. "Are you serious, Sarah?" clarified the CFO, a sudden panic in his voice as he realized what kind of employee they were losing. "The digitalization strategy you developed brought us $34 million in net savings last quarter alone." I just smiled demurely. I believe that after 13 years of working 76-hour weeks, I am more than deserving of it. But I kept quiet about one important detail that I hadn't disclosed to anyone. I had already secured a new 18-month consulting agreement worth $7 million. Jonathan Pierce, the CEO of Vanguard Dynamics and my mentor for 13 years, had been trying to get me on his team for years. As soon as he heard rumors of my departure from Apex Solutions, he immediately put forward an offer that matched my true market value. This whole situation was the height of irony. My mother-in-law, Meryl, had spent 13 years at every family dinner announcing to everyone present that I was just a secretary playing at being a businesswoman, and that real Patterson women didn't stoop to working. She would humiliatingly force me to pass canapés to guests at her charity evenings, introducing me as nothing more than David's wife, who has some insignificant little job downtown. And at that very same time, I was restructuring multi-billion-dollar assets, and my professional experience alone was worth more than all of Meryl's properties combined. However, I had long since learned that any attempt to defend myself to her was absolutely futile. David, as always, just sat silently beside me while his mother systematically devalued my every achievement. This had to end. Leaving the gleaming skyscrapers of Apex Solutions that day, I had no idea just how drastic these changes would be. At that very moment, my private banker was already processing the transfer of funds intended for the start of my new chapter. The moment I saw that mansion in the Hamptons, it took my breath away. It had 5 bedrooms, huge panoramic windows overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, and a private path down to the water that made every sunrise feel like a personal gift. At $5.1 million, it was the most significant purchase I had ever made. But I paid the entire amount in one lump sum, using funds from my newly registered company, Patterson Consulting Group LLC. "My congratulations, Ms. Patterson," said my real estate attorney, Robert Miller, as we finalized the documents. "The title deeds are registered to your company, and we've included a clause stating that you, as the sole owner, determine who may be on the premises. Any person who has not received your personal permission to be present will be considered a trespasser, which is prosecutable by law." "That is exactly what's needed," I confirmed, signing with the very pen Jonathan had given me as a gift. "I want my position to be legally invulnerable." I chose the LLC structure not just for the tax advantages. This structure was intended to be my shield. Meryl had spent years treating any of David's property as if it belonged to the entire family, and I needed barriers she couldn't ignore. The Articles of Incorporation clearly stipulated my 100% ownership, excluding any potential spousal claims under New York state law. I still hadn't told David about my purchase. Our paths were diverging more and more. He spent his life running his mother's errands, while I was building my own empire, which he didn't even seem to notice. David knew I had quit, but he assumed I was just taking a month's vacation before looking for a new job, what his mother would call another stress-free little job. Immediately after closing the deal, I hired a team of technicians. They installed a state-of-the-art security system, equipping the house with biometric scanners on the locks and surveillance cameras monitoring every inch of the perimeter. I needed the maximum level of privacy. That first evening, I stood on the terrace, watching the sun sink into the ocean, and I felt something I had been deprived of for the last 15 years. Peace. The moving vans with my personal, carefully selected belongings were due to arrive the next day. I couldn't have imagined that Meryl, at that very moment, was already developing her plan of invasion. The tone for all of this had been set on our wedding day. During the reception dinner, Meryl stood up for a toast. She proclaimed, "We welcome you to the Patterson family. But I want you to know, women in our family do not need to work. Our domain is estates, not office cubicles." That single jab defined my place in their hierarchy for the next 13 years. In their eyes, I was forever the outsider, the ambitious careerist who, for some reason, didn't want to be content with David's supposed successes. Meanwhile, everyone tactfully turned a blind eye to the fact that his real estate business was barely breaking even. The entire financial burden, from the mortgage to their lavish lifestyle, rested solely on my shoulders, on my salary and my bonuses. This was especially evident at Thanksgiving. Meryl had gathered 20 select guests. She immediately relegated me to the serving staff, tossing out a caustic remark that I must be used to running errands at my job. All evening, while her friends laughed carelessly in the living room, sipping wine and cocktails, I spent on my feet, carrying dishes, and making sure no one's glass was empty. David, of course, noticed my dejected state when he came into the kitchen. But his support was limited to a perfunctory phrase, "Sarah, come on, don't take it to heart. Just play along, it's easier for everyone." This became the norm. In public, Meryl never missed a chance to introduce me to her friends from the country club, and this is David's wife. The one who insists on having her own career. This was always followed by an exchange of condescending glances. She masterfully accidentally planned family gatherings on the same days I had crucial board meetings. But the last straw was her stunt at a charity gala. She cornered my CEO's wife and, with false sadness in her voice, complained to her that I had apparently chosen a career over children. Meryl added that she was terrified this would drag on so long that she risks not living to see grandchildren. Meryl was unaware of one thing. She had no idea that Jonathan Pierce was closely monitoring my career growth. A curious pattern had emerged. The harder Meryl tried to publicly humiliate me, the more significant the support I received from Jonathan. Every jab from her resulted in a new, larger project, a more lucrative contract, or broader professional recognition for me. For example, in that new $7 million consulting agreement I had just finalized, there was one very important clause. It legally obligated the company to list me as the lead strategic consultant in all public materials and press releases. This was no accident. It was a calculated move by Jonathan to ensure that my contribution could no longer be ignored or hidden. "Your mother-in-law is simply a short-sighted woman," Jonathan told me bluntly over lunch last month. "The fact that she doesn't value you is an enormous gift to the rest of the business world." Nevertheless, there was a huge gulf between knowing my value deep down and openly asserting it. Until this moment, I had always chosen peaceful coexistence, avoiding direct confrontation. But that era of my life was coming to an end. In early October, I received an email from Jonathan Pierce. The subject line was marked, "Strictly confidential." Board approved. "Sarah," the text read, "the Vanguard Dynamics Board of Directors has unanimously approved our proposal. We are prepared to execute an 18-month exclusive strategic consulting contract valued at $7 million. On top of this sum, performance bonuses are structured, reaching up to $2.4 million. He went on to clarify, your unique digital transformation methodology will be implemented across all our subsidiaries. The contract becomes effective on November 1st. I want to note that this makes you the highest paid independent consultant in the entire history of Vanguard Dynamics. Your experience and your vision are worth every cent of these $7 million. I reread the message several times before its meaning fully sank in. This wasn't just a professional victory. This was complete and total validation. Of particular significance was the contract clause guaranteeing that I would be publicly introduced as the chief strategist for Vanguard Dynamics at all major corporate events. My contribution to every innovation was to receive full recognition. The era of living in the shadows was over. The scale of the upcoming task was colossal. I was to restructure the operations of a company with 60,000 employees in 14 countries. My entire methodology, which I had honed over 13 years while being systematically devalued, would finally be appreciated. Moreover, the contract provided a dedicated team of 40 analysts at my full disposal and a multi-million-dollar budget for the project's implementation. I immediately made 2 copies of this email, one I saved for myself, and the second I sent to my lawyer. This wasn't just about money. This was about finally being recognized for who I truly am. Every snide remark from Meryl, every time she called me a gold digger, every moment of David's cowardly silence, I had spent years transforming all that pain into something undeniable, into my professionalism. And the sweetest part of it all was that the contract was already signed and legally binding. Nothing that Meryl or David could say or do could stop what had been set in motion. To organize the move, I hired an elite agency, Prestige Movers. My main condition was crystal clear: I require complete, 100% confidentiality. I emphasized that there should be no mentions on social media or public reports of their work. We understand, Ms. Patterson, the manager assured me. We specialize in serving high-profile clients. Discretion is our standard protocol. I spent 3 full days personally sorting through my belongings, deciding exactly what would come with me to the Hamptons. I gave the most attention to the future home office. I had already ordered a custom desk to face the ocean and planned a dual-monitor workstation for strategic planning. The most critical element was a separate, secure server to store all confidential documentation related to Vanguard Dynamics. It was clear, this wasn't just a house by the sea. This was my new command center, the headquarters for managing a $7 million contract. I envisioned the master bedroom as my personal sanctuary, a place of absolute peace. Its entire atmosphere was to be the embodiment of my new life. I decided that it would not contain a single item reminiscent of the house I shared with David. Only new things, reflecting the tranquility and clarity I had lacked for so long. The enormous walk-in closet was reserved for an entirely new wardrobe, which I was buying with future meetings with boards of directors and C-suite executives in mind. The era of having to hide my success behind the modest, respectable wife image Meryl had forced on me was over. I blocked off 2 weeks of complete, uninterrupted rest in my schedule before the official start of the Vanguard Dynamics contract. 14 days that I planned to dedicate exclusively to walking on the beach, reading books non-stop, and trying to remember who I was before 13 years of humiliating devaluation. My calendar was empty, my phone was on Do Not Disturb, and my location was unknown to anyone. For the first time in 13 years, I feel free, was the entry in my personal journal that night. The most telling part? David didn't even notice my 4-day absence while I was inspecting the property and signing all the purchase documents. He was busy, helping his mother create the seating chart for her next charity gala. I had stopped reporting my movements to him months ago, when I finally realized that he never truly listened to me. The move was scheduled for dawn on October 27th. According to my plan, by sunset that same day, I would be in my new home, starting the countdown to my new life. I decided I would tell David about everything later. When I was ready. And exclusively on my terms. How naive I was. I should have guessed that Meryl would somehow find out about it first. I knew Meryl was capable of a lot, but I criminally underestimated just how far she was willing to go. On October 25th, while I was fully immersed in the pleasant task of setting up my home in the Hamptons, she pulled off an entire operation. She brazenly walked into David's office and started rummaging through his email, a direct invasion of privacy. She didn't have to look long. First, she stumbled upon a bank document, a notification of a large transfer from our joint account to mine. This was the transfer I'd made to claim my share of our assets. That clue was enough for her. Digging deeper, she hit the jackpot. She found a copy of the real estate purchase agreement. The bank had made a fatal error by sending a copy of this document to David's email. Her constant bragging at family dinners about having informants everywhere turned out not to be empty words. Her next move was the pinnacle of manipulation. She called the real estate agency and coolly introduced herself using my name, Sarah Patterson. She lied, claiming she urgently needed the exact address to finalize an insurance policy. Some inexperienced employee fell for the trick. He not only dictated the full address in the Hamptons to her, but also, unfortunately for me, confirmed my planned move-in date, October 27th. With all the necessary information in hand, Meryl immediately proceeded to do what she did virtuously, create an alternate reality. She began her smear campaign. She immediately called all the close relatives and two of her best friends. To each of them, she recited a carefully crafted lie. Her version was truly brazen, that her son David had secretly bought this luxurious oceanfront mansion as a grand gift for her upcoming birthday, which was on December 30th. In this story, I was cast in the role of the villain, a greedy and ungrateful wife who, upon learning of the gift, was now trying to take it away. To cement this fiction in the public consciousness, she immediately published a post on her Instagram. It was probably some stock photo of a beach with an ecstatic caption, "Absolutely thrilled. My dear son just gave me the best surprise for my birthday, December 30th. Red heart. Some people, of course, are trying to ruin this moment with their drama, but what could be more important than family? The effect was achieved. The post instantly garnered a flurry of likes and enthusiastic comments. In her mind, this lie, reinforced by public approval, became the truth. The legal documents no longer mattered to her. And what about David? He, in his usual style, remained blissfully ignorant. He was sitting in his office, not even suspecting that his mother had just set in motion a mechanism that was about to destroy their entire life. On the evening of October 27th, my solitude was broken. It was my first night in the house. I was standing on the terrace enjoying the silence, when the phone rang. It was Meryl. Her voice had those same notes of saccharine superiority that I knew so well. "Sarah, I'm calling so we can coordinate our arrival tomorrow. David has already given his approval." I froze. "Sorry, I don't quite understand what you're talking about." She let out a condescending chuckle. "The house in the Hamptons, dear. Let's not play games. I'm aware that David bought it for me as a birthday present, and we've already agreed that the master bedroom will be mine. I've already approved the entire design plan. My decorator will arrive tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp." In the background, I could make out David trying to object unclearly. "Mom, wait, stop." Meryl cut him off mid-sentence. "David, be quiet. I'll handle this." Her tone, directed at me, instantly turned to steel. "Listen, if you're not comfortable with this, you can always find yourself another place. This is Patterson property now. It's about time you started acting accordingly." 13 years of corporate hardening did not fail me. Despite my internal fury, my voice was even. "I understand you." "Excellent," she snapped. "And one more thing. I've invited all our close relatives and my two best friends over for lunch tomorrow to celebrate. So get the place looking decent. Don't you dare embarrass our family." She hung up. I was left standing in the silence, staring at the dark waves. I was overcome by a wave of anger that I had been accumulating all these years. But that emotion subsided as quickly as it appeared, giving way to something far more productive, an icy, surgical calculation. I went back to my office and opened my laptop. It didn't take me long to find the files I needed: my LLC's articles of incorporation, the purchase and sale agreement, and that legally flawless clause about occupancy rights. My next call was to Robert Miller, my attorney. "Robert, it's Sarah Patterson. I have an emergency, we need to act fast. I need an official no trespassing order ready by morning. And second, contact the best security firm in town. I need a patrol at my gates tomorrow. I am expecting an attempt at unlawful entry." I paused and, for the first time all evening, smiled. "Oh, and I will personally take care of preparing an unforgettable reception for them." This time, Meryl had crossed a line from which there was no return. I spent several hours on the terrace in complete solitude. My anger, which I had suppressed for 13 years, transformed into a cold, crystalline resolve. This was a line I would no longer allow to be crossed. My phone was blowing up with messages. Relatives and even David were urging me to be understanding and give in to Meryl. But this only strengthened my position. The era of compromise was over. I dialed Robert Miller again. I demanded that he prepare absolutely all documents confirming my sole ownership through the LLC, and I also inquired what penalties one would face for attempting to use another's real estate as collateral. "That borders on a federal crime, Sarah," he replied. I also asked him to ensure the recording of the phone conversation with Meryl's threats was preserved as evidence. As soon as I hung up, I went into my banking app and saw something that changed everything. The bank had sent a notification of suspicious activity. Someone had attempted to verify my Hamptons property for a collateral-based loan. The time of the request, 2 p.m. Meryl had tried to commit fraud with my house before she even called me. Tomorrow, she expects to see a broken daughter-in-law. Instead, she will meet the true owner, armed with facts, the law, and 13 years of accumulated rage. Robert Miller arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, his briefcase stuffed with legal documents. He laid them out on the table and confirmed my absolute legal standing. Patterson Consulting Group LLC is the sole owner of the house. No marital rights or third-party claims apply here. When I showed him yesterday's bank alert about the collateral check, his face darkened. He immediately contacted a colleague specializing in financial crimes while I checked the security protocols. The guards were already at the gate with instructions not to let anyone in without my personal authorization. When he returned to the conversation, Robert was grim. His colleague had confirmed our worst fears. Meryl had submitted an application yesterday for a $500,000 line of credit. She used my Hamptons house address and signed the documents, passing herself off as the owner. This wasn't just arrogance. This was a federal crime. At that moment, an icy calm washed over me. Meryl had just handed me the weapon to destroy her reputation herself. I instructed Robert to meticulously document every fact of this fraud. Then I asked him to confirm the date of the New York Real Estate Symposium. "It's scheduled for November 20th, he replied. I nodded. It would be there, in front of the entire business community, that I would put an end to this. Meryl wanted to take my house. Instead, she would lose the one thing she cherished most, her flawless public image. At 11 a.m. sharp, the show began at my gates. I watched on the cameras as Meryl, in her Lexus, furiously berated my security guards. At that very same moment, the phone rang. It was an employee from Bank of America, from the Fraud Prevention Department. He informed me that they had received an extremely suspicious application for review. Someone was trying to obtain $500,000 using my Hamptons property as collateral. I didn't apply for anything, I snapped, my eyes glued to the monitor. The employee confirmed that their system had raised an alarm. It turned out that someone had shown up at their office the day before, given my name, and provided documents. The signature on the application had already been flagged by their experts as a high-probability forgery. I immediately gave him Robert Miller's contact information and instructed him to send my lawyer absolutely everything they had on this case. And just for the full picture, I added in an icy tone, the very fraudster who forged my signature is, at this very moment, trying to forcibly enter my private property. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then the banker stated in a very serious voice that this was no longer just an attempt at deception. This was forgery of financial documents, which is a serious federal crime. According to him, the bank had no choice but to immediately refer this case to the FBI. I watched the monitor as Meryl put on a circus at the gates. She was waving some papers, screaming at the security. Behind her stood a moving van, and next to her, her support group of relatives and friends. At that very moment, Robert's phone pinged. An email from Bank of America had arrived. The contents were shocking. It was a complete set of irrefutable evidence. We saw crystal clear stills from the bank's surveillance cameras. There was Meryl, sitting at a manager's desk, personally forging my signature. Robert was stunned by such brazen stupidity. "This is unbelievable," he muttered, "to do something like this under cameras, leaving a perfect paper trail. Did she seriously think she would get away with this?" "She always thought so," I replied coldly, watching as Meryl, to top it all off, called the police on my own security guards. "Well, this time she has fatally miscalculated," Robert concluded. "This is a whole bouquet of federal crimes, document forgery, wire fraud. She is facing real prison time." Robert and I watched the performance from the office, making a full video recording. Meryl was at the gate, behaving completely erratically. She screamed at the security that she was the owner and that she was being harassed. The guard, maintaining complete composure, repeated time and again that access to private property without the owner's permission was impossible. She tried her entire arsenal of lies, claiming she had keys, then that she had left personal belongings inside. Every lie was easily shattered by the facts. She even physically tried to climb the fence but stopped when the guard pointed to the camera. Her guests, relatives and friends, were visibly uncomfortable, and one of them even tried to calm her down, but Meryl just screamed at her. And then, losing the last remnants of self-control, she made a fatal mistake. In front of witnesses and recorded by the cameras, Meryl grabbed the gate and began to shake and yank it with frantic force, trying to break the lock. The guard immediately dialed 911 and reported an attempted break-in. As soon as the approaching wail of sirens cut through the silence, her entire support group instantly vanished. The moving van driver hit the gas, and her guests scattered to their cars. Only Meryl was left. In a total frenzy, she continued to yank on the gate, screaming that this was her house. The police patrol pulled up just as the lock, under her assault, gave way with a crack. While the police were dealing with the incident at my gates, Meryl was, in real time, broadcasting her own disgrace on social media. She immediately published an Instagram post accusing me of trying to steal the house that David had allegedly bought for her as a gift. She urged everyone to share this injustice, tagging the entire upper echelon of New York society in the post. The initial sympathetic comments quickly gave way to skepticism, especially when one of her friends, who had just fled the scene, wrote, "Meryl, the police just confirmed the house doesn't belong to you. This is very embarrassing." Paying no attention, Meryl went further and started an Instagram Live. She broadcast my security guards and the police to the whole world, continuing to insist on her rights. And in that same live stream, she made a fatal error. She publicly promised that she would expose my fraudulent schemes at the upcoming New York Real Estate Symposium. Her madness didn't end there. She called the editorial office of a popular style magazine to reschedule the photo shoot for her new home. The magazine's reaction was swift and public. They officially stated on social media that they had no arrangements with Meryl Patterson, but they did have an exclusive shoot planned for Sarah Patterson's stunning new mansion. Her version of events was collapsing before everyone's eyes, but she didn't notice. Even as the police officially escorted her off my property, she continued to type furiously on her phone. Meryl had just, with her own hands, sent out invitations to everyone for her public humiliation. Robert immediately pulled up the information on the upcoming real estate symposium on his laptop. November 20th, he reported. The Plaza Hotel, New York. 750 guests, full live stream. He pointed to a line, Meryl Patterson, gold sponsor. $50,000 contribution. The theme of the event, ironically, was integrity in real estate. But the main thing was something else. The keynote speaker for the evening was listed as Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Vanguard Dynamics. I immediately called Jonathan. "Sarah," he said, not even letting me start, "the whole city saw that circus on Instagram. I was already planning to announce your $7 million contract during my speech." "Then I have one request," I replied. "I need a seat at the head table." He not only agreed but added that members of his board of directors would also be in attendance. Meanwhile, Robert discovered a morality clause in Merrill's sponsorship contract. Any fraud or criminal activity would lead to the immediate revocation of her status and a lifetime ban from participation. And the cherry on top, Merrill had been allocated 3 minutes on stage to receive an award for her contribution to the community. "Robert," I said, "we have until November 20th. Prepare a complete file on the bank fraud. By that time, the FBI will have its initial report." Merrill herself had chosen the stage for her exposé. I would simply ensure that she got exactly what she wanted. In the following days, I assembled my arsenal. Jonathan Pierce was furious. He immediately mobilized 3 members of the Vanguard Dynamics board, including the CFO, to be present at the symposium on November 20th. Their task was simple: to be ready to publicly confirm, under oath, every detail of my $7 million contract. The evidence poured in. Bank of America sent Robert an official finding, confirming the attempted fraud of $500,000. The document stated the case had been referred to the FBI. My realtor also provided a written affidavit, documenting how Merrill had deceitfully tricked his staff into giving her my property's address. Support came from unexpected quarters. Even David's business partners contacted me, offering to testify against Merrill's reputation. But the most powerful blow came from one of her closest friends, who secretly passed me records proving how Merrill had publicly taken credit for my large, anonymous donations for years. By the beginning of November, my dossier was bulletproof. Robert had dozens of testimonies, hours of audio recordings, and, most importantly, a federal fraud case number. Merrill, in blissful ignorance, continued to post daily on social media about her beach house and the truth she was preparing for the symposium. David finally sent me a pathetic message: "Mom's gone crazy. She won't listen to me." I didn't reply. He'd had 13 years to make her listen. His time was up. November 20th. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was packed. Merrill arrived as one of the first, draped in a couture gown worth tens of thousands of dollars. She acted as the host of the evening, greeting investors and politicians at the entrance. I overheard her bragging about her new acquisition in the Hamptons, promising to reveal all the details during her acceptance speech. I entered the ballroom a little later, having chosen a severe but elegant black dress for the evening. As Jonathan had advised, restrained power. When Merrill saw me, her face twisted in fury. She couldn't understand what I was doing here. I didn't grace her with an answer, but simply walked calmly past, heading straight for the head table. "Good evening, Merrill," I tossed over my shoulder. "Didn't you know? I'm the keynote speaker's special guest." David, standing beside her, turned deathly pale. He instantly understood this was a trap, but he didn't yet grasp its scale. He tried to say something to his mother, but she cut him off. "This is my night," she hissed. "I'm the gold sponsor." 750 of New York's most influential people filled the hall, not counting the tens of thousands watching the live stream. Merrill had managed to visit almost every table, showing guests screenshots of my house from the real estate listing on her phone. The ceremony began. The MC came on stage and gave a speech about the importance of integrity in real estate, such was the ironic theme of the evening. Then he began to honor the sponsors. Merrill fidgeted in her chair, adjusting her diamonds, ready for her moment of glory. She didn't know that this same broadcast was being watched in real time by FBI agents, who were just waiting for her to publicly repeat her fraudulent claims of ownership. Across the room, Jonathan Pierce met my gaze. He gave a barely perceptible nod. The show was beginning. The MC announced, "And now, our gold sponsor, Meryl Patterson. To thunderous applause, Meryl ascended the stage. The screens lit up with her name. She took the microphone and began to speak about the legacy and excellence of the Patterson family. Then she moved on to the main event. She declared that her family was continuing the legacy through strategic acquisitions. At that moment, on the giant screens behind her, photos of my house in the Hamptons appeared, the ones she had stolen from the real estate listing. "This is our newest acquisition," she announced, "and I want to invite all of you to our housewarming next month." The room buzzed with excitement. She finished with a direct attack on me, looking right at me at the head table. She pontificated about how some people try to buy their way into high society, but true class can only be inherited, not acquired. I sat motionless. David, next to her, seemed to sink into his chair. The MC thanked Meryl and turned the floor over to the keynote speaker, Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Vanguard Dynamics. Jonathan rose to the stage. Meryl hadn't yet left, soaking in the last of the applause. He walked past her, and the way he looked at her made the smile on her face falter. The room fell instantly silent under his commanding gaze. "Good evening," Jonathan began, his voice filling the hall. "Tonight's theme is integrity. But I want to talk about value. Not the kind that's inherited, but the kind that's earned through sweat and intellect. The kind of value that changes industries." Meryl froze on the stage. Jonathan turned and looked directly at her. "Let me tell you about a person who is the living embodiment of that true value." Jonathan Pierce's voice filled the hall. "I want to introduce you to the architect of our future growth. Our new chief strategic consultant." At that moment, the screens behind him changed. My professional photograph appeared, my name, Sarah Patterson, and the contract details, $7 million plus $2,400,000 in performance bonuses. A collective gasp swept through the room. 750 of the city's most powerful people stared at figures that were larger than the annual budgets of many of their companies. Jonathan continued, listing my achievements, including the $34 million saved for Apex Solutions in a single quarter. Meryl, still standing on stage, was petrified. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The cameras showed her shock in close-up to the entire hall and thousands of viewers online. "Sarah," Jonathan said, looking directly at me, "please join me up here." I stood up from the head table and walked onto the stage, bypassing the frozen Meryl as if she were a statue. The hall erupted in applause, this time, genuine and deafening. Jonathan announced that this was the largest consulting fee in the history of Vanguard Dynamics, because, he added, looking at Meryl, true value cannot be hidden or devalued, no matter how hard someone tries. I saw David in the audience. He was whiter than a sheet, his phone buzzing non-stop. And then Meryl, forgetting her microphone was still live, whispered with venom, "That's a lie. She couldn't. She's a nobody." Her words echoed through the deathly silent hall. Every guest heard them. The entire online audience heard them. And the FBI agents who were watching closely heard them. Jonathan kept his cold gaze fixed on Meryl. "You mentioned something about it being important for everyone to know their place," he asked sarcastically into the mic. The evening's MC rushed onto the stage, trying to save the situation. He quietly pleaded with Meryl to return to her table, but she didn't hear him. She was completely paralyzed, watching as her world turned to dust in front of 750 members of the elite. But Jonathan wasn't finished with his demolition. "Speaking of legacy," he continued, "Sarah recently made another brilliant investment." The giant screens behind him changed images again. Now, they displayed a photograph of my luxurious mansion in the Hamptons. The hall gasped again, recognizing the house Meryl had been bragging about all evening. "Meryl, that's her house, not yours." A clear female voice suddenly rang out from the audience. It was one of her best friends, the very one who had witnessed her disgrace at my gates. Jonathan nodded, as if thanking her for the comment. I was just about to clarify that matter. The image on the screen changed once more. Now it wasn't just a photo, but a legal document, enlarged so that everyone in the hall could read it. Owner, Patterson Consulting Group LLC. Sole member, Sarah Patterson. When Meryl spun around in a panic to leave the stage, 2 hotel security officers quietly blocked her path. She gripped the microphone, which was still on, and her trembling voice carried throughout the hall. This is some terrible mistake. My son David. Her lie was cut off by a firm voice from the front row. A man in a business suit stood up. That's not true, Mrs. Patterson. He introduced himself as the head of the Fraud Prevention Department at Bank of America. We have the documents, he continued. Sarah Patterson paid 100% of the home's value through her company. In fact, we are here to speak with you about your loan application from yesterday. A dead silence fell over the Plaza Ballroom. All 750 guests leaned forward, holding their breath. Meryl's face went from red to ashen white. I don't know what you're. The application for $500,000, the banker stated flatly. The one where you used property that doesn't belong to you as collateral. The one where you forged the real owner's signatures. A collective gasp tore through the room. Hundreds of phones shot up to film the scene. The live stream exploded with comments. One of the security guards on stage quietly said to Meryl, "Ma'am, you'll need to stay here. The authorities have been notified and are en route." David finally jumped to his feet in the audience, his face contorted in horror. "Mom, what did you do?" But the answer was no longer needed. Meryl had just, live, in front of the entire New York elite, provided the evidence of her own crime. In sheer desperation, Meryl tore the microphone from Jonathan. "She owes me," she shrieked at the entire hall. "I raised her husband. Everything she has is rightfully mine." It was a public admission. Every word was captured by hundreds of phones and the live broadcast. Social media exploded. Hashtags linking her name with the scandal instantly trended. Jonathan coolly took the microphone back. "I believe, Mrs. Patterson, that's what they call a confession in court." At that very moment, 2 police officers entered the ballroom. The MC, pale as a sheet, tried to apologize to the 750 guests for the slight interruption. "No apologies needed," a loud voice called out from the hall. It was one of the city's most respected developers. "This is the most honest ceremony I've ever seen. Finally, someone is being held accountable for their actions." The room erupted in applause. But they weren't applauding Meryl. They were applauding justice being served. Meryl looked frantically at her son. "David, it's a trap. Do something. Tell them." David slowly rose from his seat. All eyes turned to him. "Mom, you forged her signature. You tried to pull a scam under bank cameras. You have tormented my wife for 13 years. His voice trembled, but for the first time it held steel. "I am not covering for you anymore." This finally broke Meryl. She lost all control. She grabbed the microphone again, her voice cracking into a scream. "I had every right to that house. She is a nobody. Just a gold-digging girl who trapped my son. I built the Patterson name. Me." The number of online viewers at that moment surpassed 50,000. "You all know me," she screamed at the room. "I've donated millions. I'm on all the boards. And this little secretary thinks she can humiliate me like this?" "This little secretary," Jonathan said, taking the mic from her again, "has brought more real value to the economy than you have ever inherited. And unlike you, she earned her every cent." Meryl rounded on David. "You pathetic weakling. You let her turn you against your own mother. Your father would be ashamed of you." David stood up to his full height. "No, Mom. Father would be ashamed of you. He built his business on honesty. And you just, in front of the whole city, destroyed his entire legacy." The police officer stepped forward, heading straight for her. "Mrs. Patterson, you'll need to come with us." "Don't you dare touch me," she shrieked. "I am Meryl Patterson." But her name no longer held any weight. At that moment, her best friend stood up from the audience. "Meryl, I have to inform you. The charity committee just held an emergency vote. You are expelled." Immediately. Following her, the association president rose. "Mrs. Patterson, your gold sponsorship is revoked. You are henceforth banned for life from attending any of our events." Meryl looked around wildly. 750 phones were pointed at her. Her entire empire, built on lies and intimidation, had collapsed on live television in under 10 minutes. "This isn't over," she screamed as the officers took her by the arms. "You will all regret this." "Stop." My voice cut through the ensuing silence. I took the microphone. The officers paused, holding Meryl. "I have a choice," I said evenly. "I can let this case proceed. Bank fraud, document forgery. Or I can offer a settlement." Meryl, who had been struggling a second ago, froze. A desperate hope flickered in her eyes. "But to do that," I continued, "one thing is required. A full, public confession. Here. And now." The officers brought her back to the microphone. She was broken. Her expensive dress was wrinkled, her hair a mess. She began. 13 years of lies end today," I said quietly, knowing the microphone would catch every word. Meryl looked at the 750 guests, at the cameras, at her son, who had turned away in horror. "I apologize," she forced out. "I lied. I lied about the house. I forged the signatures." Her voice broke. "I was wrong." "And?" I prompted. The word seemed to cause her physical pain. "And Sarah Patterson, she is the rightful owner. She earned everything she has." Now I addressed the room. "You have all witnessed the truth. For 13 years, this woman called me a worthless gold digger. Tonight, you saw who truly earned their place, and who simply squandered inherited privilege." I turned to the officers. "She will receive my settlement terms tomorrow. If she violates even one of them, the full prosecution will be reinstated." As I left the stage, the ballroom erupted in applause. This wasn't polite clapping. This was real, deafening recognition. Jonathan Pierce met me at the stairs and gave me a tight hug. David remained sitting alone at his table, his face in his hands, finally realizing the full depth of his betrayal. And Meryl, her empire of fear turned to dust, was led out of the hall in handcuffs, to the flashes of hundreds of cameras. The next morning, the complete collapse of Meryl's reputation began. The first call came at 8 a.m. from Bank of America. I was informed that the $500,000 loan application was nullified, and all of Meryl Patterson's personal and business accounts were immediately frozen pending the federal investigation. Next came a notification from the New York Real Estate Commission. Meryl's license was summarily suspended, and given the public nature of the incident, she was facing permanent revocation. Then Robert Miller drove out to me in the Hamptons. He confirmed the FBI had everything: the bank video, the forged documents, the live stream recording. It all depended on my decision whether to press charges. Meanwhile, her social world, which she had spent decades building, was evaporating before her eyes. The country club called David and informed him of his mother's immediate and unanimous expulsion. The 3 charity boards she sat on sent formal letters of removal. The video from the symposium went viral, gaining millions of views. Hashtags with Meryl's name and the word fraud dominated social media, and her phrase, "she's a nobody," became a universal meme. News agencies picked up the story, and soon headlines about the New York socialite busted in fraud became national news. Her own circle of acquaintances delivered crushing blows. One of her best friends, who was at the symposium, gave an interview confirming that their committee had discovered Meryl had been taking credit for my large, anonymous donations for years, using them to get tax write-offs. Even her sister, Barbara, publicly apologized to me on social media, writing that she was ashamed of her years of silence. David's business partners began calling me, offering support and a willingness to testify about Meryl's questionable reputation. Jonathan Pierce, for his part, gave an interview to Forbes, calling me a quiet force and confirming that my multi-million-dollar contract was recognition of a brilliant talent that had been in the shadows for too long. The cherry on top was the leak of the security camera footage from my gates, the one of Meryl frantically trying to break the lock. I received a desperate message from David. Meryl's lawyer had informed her that she was facing real prison time. She was begging for the settlement I had offered. The woman who had spent 13 years calling me nobody had lost everything: money, reputation, connections, and freedom. She herself had become a nobody, and this time, the whole world was a witness. 2 days after the events at the symposium, David came to see me in the Hamptons. He looked haggard, like a man who hadn't slept the entire time. It was the first time in 13 years that he spoke to me with absolute sincerity, without trying to make excuses. He stated plainly that he had behaved with cowardice. He admitted that his years of silence while his mother openly humiliated me were simply him choosing the easy path. He came to describe the fallout. The family had completely cut ties with Meryl. Relatives who had always tried to stay out of it were now calling him to say they would no longer pretend nothing was happening and cover for his mother. The situation had escalated to the point where their aunt, Barbara, Meryl's sister, had been forced to get an official restraining order after Meryl, in a rage over the betrayal, began threatening her. The family lawyers, according to David, were horrified. They demanded that he immediately and publicly distance himself from his mother's actions, as her scandal now threatened the reputation of the entire legitimate business his father had built. Meryl was already in the process of being completely disinherited. David also shared that he had immediately started psychotherapy. The specialist, he said, had already pointed out his serious codependency with his mother and how he had, in essence, encouraged her destructive behavior his entire life. "I'm only now beginning to understand," he said, "the damage my constant inaction caused." The family group chat, where Meryl had once ruled supreme, was now full of messages condemning her actions. Even distant cousins wrote that they were ashamed they had been passive observers. The traditional December family gathering was cancelled. At the end, he looked at me. He said he had no right and wouldn't dare to ask for forgiveness. He just wanted me to know, he finally understood the full depth of his transgression. And he was prepared to spend the rest of his life trying to make up for it, if I ever gave him that chance. What happened at the symposium had an immediate and staggering effect on my career. Within the next 72 hours, my work phone was ringing off the hook. I received personal calls from 3 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. One of them, offering me a $3 million consulting project, said outright, "Sarah, your composure under that kind of pressure is exactly the leadership quality we are looking for." Almost immediately, an invitation came from Harvard Business School. They asked me to be the keynote speaker at their Women in Leadership Summit. Their reasoning was that my story of overcoming obstacles both in family and in the corporate world was something their students needed to hear. Next, a major publisher approached me with a 7-figure advance for a book about my journey and strategies for asserting one's value. My status changed instantly. I set my new personal consulting rate, $15,000 per day, with a 3-month minimum contract. Not one of the new clients even tried to negotiate. On the contrary, such a high price only attracted the most serious players in the market. Forbes magazine immediately included me in their special issue, Women to Watch. Their article began with a killer contrast. While her mother-in-law Meryl Patterson was publicly calling her a nobody, Sarah Patterson was quietly revolutionizing digital strategies for America's largest corporations. Jonathan Pierce actively supported this buzz. He gave several comments to the press, stating in one, "Sarah's methodology is priceless. She isn't expensive, she is a necessity for business survival in the new decade." My LinkedIn profile exploded. In 1 week, my follower count grew from 5,000 to 500,000 people, including C-suite executives and board members from around the world. Every post I made about the importance of professional and personal boundaries instantly went viral. But the sweetest irony of all? The woman whom Meryl once forced to pass drinks to guests at her charity functions was now receiving formal invitations to be the keynote speaker at those very same events. We were finally sitting in the office of a family psychologist, something I had been trying to achieve in vain for years. The view of the ocean outside the window was calm, unlike our conversation. I stated my position to David crystal clear: I am willing to try to save this marriage, but I will never, under any circumstances, allow myself to be disrespected again. That is my final and non-negotiable condition. Dr. Helen Ramsey, our therapist, guided the difficult session. She forced David to face the truth. For all 13 years, he had been a passive accomplice in his mother's behavior. You repeatedly chose your own comfort over showing the courage to protect your wife, she summarized. Sarah needed a partner, and you were an additional burden to her. We immediately began to develop new, strict rules for our coexistence. First, complete financial segregation until trust was rebuilt. Second, David had to completely cease all financial support for Meryl. Third, weekly couples therapy for at least a year. And finally, we were preparing to sign a postnuptial contract that would legally protect all my assets, including my business and my home in the Hamptons. I want you to understand, I explained to him, the situation has fundamentally changed. I don't need you anymore. If I decide to stay, it will be my conscious choice, not a measure of necessity. To my surprise, David agreed to every single point. For the first time, he also began attending individual therapy. He admitted that only now was he realizing how toxic his family system was, where he had been taught since childhood to put his mother's feelings above all others, including his own and mine. The new contract was crystal clear: my business, my Hamptons home, and all my future income belonged only to me. His assets were his responsibility. We were becoming partners by choice, not by financial dependence. In our third session, he finally asked, "Will you be able to forgive me?" Before I could answer, Dr. Ramsey intervened. Forgiveness is not an event, David, it's a process. Sarah needs to see real, sustained changes in behavior, not just hear promises. David nodded. I understand. I will earn it, no matter how long it takes. For the first time in 13 years of our marriage, he truly began to do the hard emotional work. First, I turned my Hamptons home into an impenetrable fortress. I implemented ironclad rules, legally certified by Robert Miller. From now on, no one, including David, could cross my threshold without a formal written invitation and an entry in the visitor log. My office, protected by biometric locks, became my personal command center. David, who now needed to schedule visits in advance, began to slowly learn what respect for boundaries meant. 6 months later, my consulting empire, Patterson Consulting Group, had brought in $12 million in revenue. I was being featured in Forbes and invited to lecture at Harvard. David, after 6 months of intensive therapy, changed radically. He shed his codependency and at public events now proudly introduced himself as Sarah Patterson's husband, a complete reversal of how he used to behave. Meryl's fate became a cautionary tale for all of New York. She completed her court-mandated therapy, but it couldn't restore her reputation. She lost everything: her assets were liquidated, her license revoked, and her former friends stopped answering her calls. The woman who tried to steal my house now lived in a modest rented apartment. And the woman she had called a nobody was running a multi-million-dollar empire from that very mansion, which had become a symbol of her freedom. Justice had been served. Several months later, David forwarded me a letter. I recognized Meryl's handwriting, but the former authoritativeness and pressure were gone. The letter seemed fragile and unsure. It was a confession. She informed me that she had completed her court-ordered therapy. According to her, for the first time in her life, she understood the real reason for her actions. It wasn't about me. It was about her own envy. She wrote that I had been a living reproach to her. I had achieved everything myself, through my own hard work, while she had simply inherited her position and spent her whole life terrified that someone would expose her as a nobody. She apologized. Not for getting caught, but for the pain she had caused me. I read the letter twice. It changed nothing. I filed it away and instructed Robert Miller to send an official reply. It was brief, noted. The restraining order remains in effect. The established boundaries are non-negotiable. We wish you well. My success had to serve something greater. I started a scholarship fund. I named it not after the Pattersons, but in honor of my late mother, who had sacrificed everything to give me an education. The first grant recipient was a young woman whose business had been nearly destroyed by her own mother-in-law. In her thank you letter, she wrote that my story had given her the strength to break the toxic cycle. You taught me, she wrote, that toxicity cannot be excused by family ties. My relationship with David also transformed. The old marriage no longer existed. On its ruins, we began to build something new, founded on brutal but necessary honesty. He finally closed his unprofitable real estate business, which had only ever been a shadow of his father's, and started building a career from scratch, in a completely new industry. For the first time in his life, he was achieving his own success. Exactly 1 year later, at that very same real estate symposium, Jonathan Pierce raised his glass as he concluded the evening. He was looking directly at me. He said that tonight, they weren't just celebrating numbers and contracts. They were celebrating true dignity. And dignity, he said, isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up, armed with irrefutable facts, unbending boundaries, and the absolute knowledge of your true worth. That night, I stood on my terrace again, and the sound of the ocean brought me a peace I hadn't known in 13 years. This house, which Meryl had tried to take from me by force, had become my true sanctuary. And the life she had so persistently tried to devalue had turned into something incredible. I realized that acknowledging someone else's guilt doesn't mean you have to tear down the boundaries you built. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a person is to let them fully face the consequences of their own actions. If this story resonated with your soul, please subscribe to our channel and be sure to hit the bell. That way, you won't miss new episodes about how important it is to be able to stand up for yourself in difficult family situations. I would be very interested to read your stories in the comments. Have you ever had to build strict, uncompromising boundaries with your partner's relatives? Tell us what it led to. Perhaps your experience will help someone else find the courage. And always remember, your true worth cannot be determined by someone else's opinion, and certainly not by the opinion of a toxic environment. Please share this video with someone who truly needs to hear this right now. Thank you for your time. And know this, you deserve absolute respect in your own home.